In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the front brakes on this Ford F-150. Located right behind your front wheels, let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket, remove all 6 lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. From the back side of the caliper, we have to remove these two 13mm headed bolts to pull the caliper off of the bracket. However, personally, before I do that, I like to break free the bleeder screw so I can push the pistons back a little bit. This will do two things. One, it'll allow me to pull the caliper off a whole lot easier. And two, it'll confirm that the pistons move freely still and I don't need to replace this caliper. We're going to have to push these pistons back no matter what, so I might as well start with that. Remove the cap off the bleeder screw and set it aside. Have a collection bucket underneath, and with an 11mm wrench, break free and loosen up this bleeder screw. There we go. Fluid is dripping. That's totally normal. Now you want to take a flathead screwdriver, a small pry bar, and stick it right between the rotor and the caliper. Very gently press this in. It's now dripping again. That's perfect. I'm going to close this off. We'll come back to it in a second, so don't tighten it up too much. Now we can unbolt the two 13mm bolts I was mentioning and pull the caliper off of its bracket. Leave this one in a couple threads so it can hold this on while you remove the lower one. Take this off. Now you can remove your top bolt as well. Hold on to the caliper, remove it from the bracket assembly, and now you don't want to hang it by the brake hose. So what I'm going to do is just flip it around and hook it onto the sway bar with a bungee cord. However, looking at the pistons here, they still need to go in a little bit. So I'll break the bleeder screw free once again. I'll grab my caliper piston depression tool so we can press these all the way down, and then we can move it out of our way so we can finish up our job. Because my tool doesn't actually reach, I'm going to remove one of the pads from here, insert it into the caliper as a spacer for my tool to press on, insert my tool. This should go nice and smooth. If this does not go smoothly, one of the pistons or both are seized. And that right there is bottomed out completely. Remove the tool, remove your pad if you used one. Give this a second so that brake fluid with no air bubbles can run out of here, out of the bleeder screw. That's how you ensure that you have no air stuck in the caliper after you've broken this free. It is dripping clear brake fluid, no air bubbles, so I'm going to close this off. Just give it a quick snug. Use a little bit of brake parts cleaner to rinse this off. Cap off your bleeder screw, and we'll set this aside out of our way. Once again, no pressure on the brake hose, so hang it with a bungee cord or a hook. Remove the outer pad as well at this point. Now we have to remove the caliper bracket from the knuckle, so use a 21mm socket and pull both of these bolts out so we can remove this off the knuckle. I'm going to leave this one in a couple threads. That'll hold the bracket for me while I loosen up the top one. Take out your top bolt. Now you can remove the lower and take the bracket off, set it aside on a workbench so you can clean it up. The rotor should just come off at this point. Nothing's holding it on. However, very often they seize onto the hub. That's the case for me here, so I'm going to have to use a hammer from the back side, right where the caliper was, and hit it. But if it does break free, I don't want it to go flying off, so I will put a lug nut back on for safety so it can hold it securely on here when it does break free. There we go. Take your safety lug nut off and remove your rotor. Now using a sanding disc or a wire wheel, maybe even a wire brush if yours isn't as bad, you want to clean the surface of this hub where the rotor mounts to avoid it rusting in the future and the rotor seizing on. But also if there's rust here, it can push the rotor out as it swells, which would then cause braking issues. What you want to focus on is this outer ridge and the inner ridge. You'll see that in the center, it's recessed a little bit. If you don't get that cleaned up perfectly, that's totally fine. You just want to focus, like I said, on these two areas. And right on the center hub ring where the rotor sits, that can also make it seize. So do the best you can, get it nice and clean. Once you have all this cleaned off, use brake parts cleaner to rinse it all down. Once it has dried off, use some anti-seize to cover this surface that you just cleaned. Otherwise, it will rust fairly quickly. You don't want to use too much because if you do, it'll squeeze out and fling all over the place. Just a nice thin coating. Also avoid getting it on the lug studs. These should stay dry. Grab the new rotor, slide it on here backwards, and that's so that it can be held on and you can clean it off a whole lot easier. Most likely it'll have some fingerprints on it and some oil from the factory. Now you want to clean all of that off. You don't want that to contaminate your brake pads. So take some brake parts cleaner and just rinse it over a collection bucket. Once you've done the backside, take it off, flip it over, and install it the right way. To hold it on and prevent it from wobbling around, I have an axle nut and a lug nut. The axle nut is just a spacer. I'm gonna thread the lug nut on just by hand, finger tight, and this will prevent it from wobbling around like I said. Now we can clean off the outer side. While that dries, let's prepare our caliper for installation. With our caliper bracket on a workbench, let's remove the old anti-rattle clips. Simply pry them up and out of the bracket. Underneath right here, we have to clean up. Mine is not too bad, but there is a little bit of rust and debris, so I'm going to take a wire brush. Now, if yours was bad, you would need to sand it down with something. You could even use a fine file and clean this off, or a wire wheel on a drill if that's what you have, but a wire brush should do the trick for me. That looks pretty good. Rinse it down. Once it has dried off, you want to use some brake grease or high temperature silicone paste that is rated for brakes. If you don't use something that's rated for brakes, it will melt really fast, get all over your brakes, and that would not be good. But you do need to coat this so that it doesn't rust in the future. You want a thin layer because when the anti-rattle clips go on, they can squeeze this out and it can get onto the rotor. You want to avoid that. Take the anti-rattle clips and you'll see that they have a larger hook and a smaller hook. The smaller hook goes in the center so it can clear the rotor, the larger hook on the outside so it can lock it in. Simply press these on. You may need to help these seat a little bit further with a pocket screwdriver. Once these are fully seated, we can do the same to the other side. Once you've done the other side, what we need to do next is remove, clean, and lubricate the slide pins. That's these right here that the caliper bolts onto. This boot is quite stuck here, so I'm going to help it along with a pocket screwdriver. This one looks like it has a little bit of rust built up in here, which means water got in. So we have to clean all of this up right here. I'm going to use a wire wheel to get this nice and clean. If you can get this cleaned up, you can definitely reuse these pins. However, if they're badly rusted and pitted, you're going to want to replace them. I also want to remove the boot and inspect it for any tears. This one looks totally fine. It's not swollen, it's not broken, so I can reuse it. If it was torn or swollen, you're going to have to replace that as well. In here, I actually have clean grease, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to stick a rag in and push it in with my pocket screwdriver, just so I can wipe some of the grease out. If you had rust in here, you could use a bore brush on a drill, spin it around with some brake parts cleaner, and remove as much rust as you can. Once again, I have clean grease. I just want to wipe it off a little bit. There we go. Inspect this area right here where the boot seals up. It's important that this stays clean as well. Lastly, I'm going to wipe the pin and then take it over to my wire wheel so I can clean this area up. To clean inside the boot, you can use a rag and just push it through. Avoid using brake parts cleaner on it because it can damage the rubber. That looks fine. Set that aside. Take a little bit of that silicone paste that you used earlier, apply it to the area where the boot seals up. Put the boot back onto the caliper bracket. Twist it a little bit to work that grease in. Take some more grease and put it inside the boot so that the pin can stay lubricated for a long time. And then lubricate the pin itself. The only thing is you can't put too much on the pin. It'll just get pushed off as you try to insert it, which is why I put grease or silicone paste inside the boot. Lubricate the area that we cleaned up here. Now slide the pin all the way down into the caliper bracket. Push it to make sure that there's no air trapped. Sometimes air gets stuck in here, so when you push it in, the boot will swell up. To get rid of that, you just push the pin in, squeeze the boot. That gets rid of any excess grease or even the air that's in there. Spin this around, everything feels nice and smooth. So now we'll do the same to the other side pin. Take your caliper bracket and slide it over the rotor. Have at least one of the bolts ready to go so you can line it up, thread it in, and secure, or temporarily secure, the bracket so you can let go and put the lower one in. Bottom these two out. And torque them to 184 foot-pounds. With those two bolts tightened up, it's time to put on the pads. Doesn't matter which one you start with. Start at an angle and then slide them in like that so they can seat fully. Make sure they slide in easily. Take your caliper, slide it over the pads and over the bracket. Seat it fully. Have your two bolts ready to go so you can secure the caliper on the bracket. And snug these two up. Sometimes it's necessary to hold the slider pins because when you try to tighten it, it all spins. So use some pliers, be careful of the boot, and with that held in place, you can now tighten your bolt. Do the same on the top. Torque these two to 27 foot-pounds. All right, do the same on the other side. Let's get the wheel on. We'll start all 6 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern, we'll torque them to 150 foot-pounds. $150 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, here we go. Double check them. Pump up the brakes. Now let's top off the master cylinder, remove the cap, fill it up to the max line, and cap it back off. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.